There is a version of your life that you chose. The job you applied for, the city you moved to, the person you said yes to, the habits you built, the beliefs you carry like furniture from apartment to apartment. You made those choices. You were there. You remember making them. But here is the question that this entire episode is built around. Were you the one choosing? Not in the legal sense. Not in the sense of external coercion or obvious pressure. But in the deeper sense, the sense that matters most, were the values, the fears, the definitions of success and safety and love that drove every one of those decisions actually yours? Or were they handed to you, so early, so quietly, so completely, that you absorbed them before you had the cognitive equipment to evaluate them? Before you even had language for what was happening to you? This is the central claim of depth psychology, and it is one of the most disorienting ideas a human being can sit with. That the architect of your life, the one drawing the blueprints, selecting the materials, deciding what gets built and what gets left in the rubble, is not the conscious, rational, self-aware version of you that you identify with. It is something older, something quieter, something that learned the rules of the world when you were still small enough to be carried. Welcome to the Echo Principle. Tonight, we meet the shadow architect. Sigmund Freud gave us the iceberg. The image that most people know even if they have never read a word of psychoanalysis. 10% above the surface, conscious thought, deliberate choice, rational intention. 90% below, drives, memories, fears, associations, patterns so deeply embedded they have no address, no name, no face. Freud's model has been revised, contested, and refined over a century of research. But the fundamental geometry of it, the idea that the visible mind is a small fraction of the total mind, has only become more supported as neuroscience has advanced. Contemporary research in cognitive science suggests that the vast majority of the brain's processing, somewhere between 95 and 99% depending on the study and the methodology, happens outside conscious awareness. 99%. The decisions you experience as deliberate, as chosen, as rational, are in many cases the final frame of a film that was already shot, edited, and scored by processes you will never directly observe. Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet demonstrated in a now famous series of experiments that the brain initiates the neural signal for a voluntary movement approximately half a second before the person reports becoming consciously aware of the intention to move. The decision was made before you knew you were deciding. This is not a philosophical abstraction. This is measurable. This is real. And if it is true for a simple physical movement, for lifting a finger, what does it mean for the larger movements of a life? For career choices? For relationship patterns? For the recurring architecture of your failures and your breakthroughs? Every human being arrives in the world running on the same basic operating system. But the programming language, the specific code that gets written on top of that system in the first years of life, is different for every person. And it is written in a medium that is almost impossible to edit later. Not because the brain is rigid. The brain is remarkably plastic, and we will get to that. But because the code written in early childhood is written before the part of the brain responsible for critical evaluation is online. The prefrontal cortex, the region that handles rational analysis, long-term planning, and the ability to question received information, does not fully develop until the mid-20s. In the first 3 to 5 years of life, it is barely functional. Which means that everything a child absorbs in those years, every message about who they are, what they deserve, what love looks like, what danger feels like, what success requires, is absorbed without a filter. Without skepticism. Without the ability to say, wait, is this actually true, or is this just what the adults around me believe? It goes straight in. Unexamined. Unchallenged. And it forms the bedrock on which every subsequent structure of personality is built. Carl Jung called this the personal unconscious. The accumulated residue of everything experienced, but not integrated. Every wound absorbed but not processed, Every belief installed but never questioned. And then, on top of that residue, you built a life. Let us make this concrete with a case study. Not a name, because the point is not biography, but pattern. But a type, a recognizable archetype, that appears again and again in the history of extraordinary achievement. The reclusive billionaire. You know the pattern. A person of extraordinary intelligence and drive who builds something genuinely world-changing. Who accumulates more resources than any individual could spend in 10 lifetimes. And who, at the peak of their power, retreats. Becomes inaccessible. Obsessive. Controlling. Suspicious of intimacy. Unable, despite every external achievement, to experience anything that resembles peace. The surface narrative is usually told in terms of genius and eccentricity. But depth psychology tells a different story. What the research on high-achieving individuals consistently reveals is a particular childhood architecture. Early experiences of instability, whether financial, emotional, or relational, that generated a core belief: safety is not given, it must be built. And it can always be taken away. That belief, installed before the child had the cognitive capacity to evaluate it, becomes the invisible engine of everything that follows. Every company founded is a fortress against the original vulnerability. Every dollar accumulated is a vote against the childhood fear. Every obsessive hour of work is the subconscious trying to solve a problem that can never actually be solved by working harder. Because the problem was never really about money. The problem was about a child who needed safety and didn't get enough of it. And the shadow architect keeps building. Long after the original threat has passed. Long after the original child has become someone the whole world recognizes. There is one domain where the shadow architect's influence is more visible than any other. More consistent. More devastatingly reliable. Your romantic relationships. In the 1960s and 70s, a British psychiatrist named John Bowlby developed what would become one of the most influential frameworks in the history of developmental psychology. Attachment theory. The idea that the bond formed between an infant and their primary caregiver in the first year of life creates an internal working model, a template, for all subsequent intimate relationships. This template is not a conscious memory. You cannot retrieve it like a file. It lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the automatic responses that get triggered before rational thought has a chance to intervene. Mary Ainsworth, building on Bowlby's work, identified 3 primary attachment styles through a now famous experimental protocol called the strange situation. Secure attachment, formed when a caregiver is consistently responsive, creates adults who can tolerate intimacy without being consumed by it, and tolerate distance without being destroyed by it. Anxious attachment, formed when caregiving is inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes cold, sometimes present, sometimes not, creates adults whose nervous system is permanently calibrated for abandonment. Who interpret ambiguity as rejection. Who confuse anxiety with love, because love was always accompanied by uncertainty. Avoidant attachment, formed when emotional needs were consistently met with withdrawal or dismissal, creates adults who learn that needing people is dangerous. Who built self-sufficiency as armor. Who find intimacy threatening even when they want it. And here is the devastating precision of it. We do not seek partners who give us what we never had. We seek partners who feel familiar. Who recreate, with eerie accuracy, the emotional texture of the first relationship we ever knew. This is the question that sits at the heart of so much human suffering. If the pattern is painful, why do we keep repeating it? The answer lies in a concept that Freud identified and that modern neuroscience has since reframed in more precise language. The repetition compulsion. The unconscious drive to recreate familiar emotional situations, even painful ones, in an attempt to finally resolve them. The nervous system does not organize experience around pleasure and pain the way we consciously think it does. It organizes experience around the familiar and the unfamiliar. And familiar, even when it hurts, registers as safe at the neurological level. Because the nervous system knows how to survive it. It has done it before. Unfamiliar, even when it is healthy, even when it is genuinely better, registers as threatening. Because it has no map for it. No established protocol. No survival data. This is why the person who grew up in chaos is uncomfortable in stability. Why the person who was never celebrated finds consistent affirmation suspicious. Why the person who was taught that love comes with conditions keeps finding partners who confirm the lesson. It is not self-destruction. It is self-consistency. The shadow architect is not trying to hurt you. It is trying to protect you using the only blueprints it was ever given. The tragedy is that those blueprints were drawn by a child. In a world that no longer exists. For a threat that has already passed. Let us talk about the moment that most people recognize, somewhere deep in their chest, even if they have never had the language for it. The moment when something good is finally happening. The promotion is offered. The relationship deepens. The creative project gains real traction. The thing you said you wanted is actually arriving. And something in you finds a way to ruin it. Not consciously. Not deliberately. You are not sitting in a quiet room deciding to destroy the good thing. It happens in the margins. A conversation that goes slightly too far. A deadline missed for no clear reason. A pattern of behavior that you can see from the outside is obviously self-defeating, but that in the moment felt entirely justified, even necessary. This is the shadow architect protecting you from the unfamiliar. Because success, genuine sustained success, requires you to occupy a version of yourself that is different from the one the subconscious was calibrated to maintain. And the subconscious, whose entire function is the preservation of the established self, will resist that with everything it has. Psychologists call this upper limiting. The unconscious cap on how much good, how much success, how much happiness the system will allow before it creates a problem to restore equilibrium. Gay Hendricks, in his work on the upper limit problem, describes it as a kind of internal thermostat. Set too low by early experience. And every time life heats up past the set point, the system finds a way to cool things back down. The question is not whether you have an upper limit. Every person reading this does. The question is where yours is set. And whether you are aware enough of the mechanism to catch it before it fires. We have been circling around Carl Jung for this entire episode. Now let us walk directly into his framework, because it is the most complete map we have for the territory we are exploring. Jung proposed that the psyche is not a single unified structure. It is a system of semi-autonomous parts, each with its own logic, its own history, its own agenda. And the largest, most powerful, least acknowledged of these parts is what he called the shadow. The shadow is not evil. This is the most common misunderstanding of Jungian psychology. The shadow is simply the part of the self that was deemed unacceptable, for whatever reason, by the environment in which you grew up. The anger that was punished into silence. The ambition that was shamed into hiding. The sensitivity that was mocked into numbness. The sexuality, the grief, the need, the creativity that did not fit the template of who you were supposed to be. These qualities do not disappear when they are rejected. They go underground. They become the shadow. And from underground, they shape behavior with far more power than they would have had if they had simply been allowed to exist in the light. Jung's most provocative claim was that the shadow is not the obstacle to a meaningful life. It is, paradoxically, the raw material of one. Because the qualities we most deny in ourselves are often the qualities that carry the most energy, the most authentic force. The person who has repressed their anger, when they finally access it cleanly, often discovers within it the capacity for extraordinary courage. The person who has hidden their sensitivity, when they finally allow it, often discovers within it the foundation of genuine creative vision. The shadow is not the enemy. It is the part of you that has been waiting, underground, for permission to come home. Here is where Jungian psychology becomes both deeply personal and genuinely vertiginous. Whatever you have pushed into the shadow does not stay quietly inside you. It travels. It moves outward, and it attaches itself to the people and situations in your external world. Jung called this projection. And it is one of the most reliable mechanisms in all of human psychology. The traits you most loudly condemn in others are almost always the traits you most deeply deny in yourself. Think about the person who triggers you most reliably. Not the person you mildly dislike. Not the person whose behavior you find unfortunate. The person who produces in you a disproportionate, almost irrational, visceral reaction. Whose existence feels like a personal affront. That intensity, that specific quality of reaction, is information. It is the shadow pointing. It does not necessarily mean you are identical to the person who triggers you. It means that something in what they represent, something in the quality they are displaying, has a counterpart in the part of you that was never allowed to surface. The person who was shamed into hiding their arrogance, and now cannot tolerate it in others. The person who was taught that ambition was selfish, and now finds ambitious people morally suspicious. The person who was forced to be endlessly cheerful, and now finds authentic expressions of sadness almost unbearable to witness. The external world, in this framework, is not separate from the internal one. It is its reflection. Life is an echo. And the echo carries, along with everything conscious and chosen, everything we have refused to look at directly. Let us ground all of this in the longest-running research we have on the subject. Because Jungian concepts, however compelling, are often dismissed as unfalsifiable. As poetry dressed as science. So let us go to the data. The Harvard study of adult development is the longest longitudinal study of human life ever conducted. Begun in 1938, it has followed its original participants and subsequently their children and grandchildren for over 80 years. Tracking health, relationships, career, happiness, and psychological well-being across the entire arc of a human life. Its findings are remarkable in their consistency. The quality of early attachment relationships is one of the strongest predictors of late-life flourishing that the study has identified. More predictive than IQ. More predictive than socio-economic status at birth. More predictive than educational achievement. The adults in the study who reported warm, secure early relationships showed measurably better physical health in their 60s and 70s, greater career satisfaction, more stable and fulfilling intimate relationships, and significantly lower rates of depression and anxiety across their lifetimes. Those who reported cold, inconsistent, or frightening early caregiving showed the reverse pattern, with striking regularity. But here is the finding that carries the most weight for our purposes today. The relationship between early experience and adult outcome was not mediated primarily by conscious memory. Many participants had only fragmentary or positive surface memories of childhoods that the research, through interviews with family members and historical records, revealed to have been significantly more difficult than remembered. The body kept the score. The nervous system kept the score. The shadow architect kept building, long after the conscious mind had filed the blueprints away under-resolved. This is the question everything has been building toward. And I want to answer it honestly, which means resisting both the false comfort of easy optimism and the paralysis of determinism. The answer is yes. With significant qualification. The brain is plastic. This is not a self-help slogan, it is one of the most important discoveries in the history of neuroscience. Neural pathways that were formed by early experience can be modified by new experience. The architecture of the self is not fixed at 5, or 15, or 50. It can be revised. But revision requires something that our culture consistently undervalues. It requires going toward the discomfort, not away from it. It requires developing the capacity to sit with what the shadow architect built, to look at it clearly, to understand its logic, before attempting to change it. because you cannot renovate a structure you refuse to enter. The therapeutic modalities that have the strongest evidence base for producing genuine structural change, psychodynamic therapy, somatic work, certain forms of trauma-informed practice, all share a common feature. They do not try to overwrite the old pattern with a new one. They make the old pattern visible. They give it language. They trace it back to its origin. And in doing so, they loosen its grip. Not eliminate. Loosen. The shadow architect does not retire. But it can be brought into conversation. It can be, gradually, over time, with patience and with courage, transformed from an unconscious driver into a conscious companion. From a force that acts on you, into a part of you that you can finally, carefully, begin to understand. So what does this actually look like? In a life. On a Tuesday. When the abstract has to become concrete or it means nothing at all. The first practice is deceptively simple, and almost nobody does it consistently. It is the practice of noticing the gap between your reaction and the situation that produced it. When a response feels disproportionate, when the irritation is larger than the inconvenience, when the fear is larger than the actual threat, when the grief is older than the current loss, that gap is a doorway. On the other side of it is information about the shadow architect. About what was built there. About what the subconscious is still trying to protect you from. You do not have to walk through the door immediately. You do not have to unpack everything in the moment. You simply have to notice that the door is there. The second practice is examining your recurring patterns without the story you usually tell about them. Not, I keep choosing the wrong people because people are untrustworthy. But I keep choosing a particular type of person, and I wonder what that pattern is serving in me. What familiar thing it is recreating. What ancient need it is trying, unsuccessfully, to finally satisfy. The third practice is the most difficult and the most transformative. It is the practice of sitting with the unfamiliar good. When something genuinely healthy arrives, it's a relationship that is calm rather than chaotic, a success that doesn't come with a crisis attached, resisting the impulse to find the problem. Allowing the nervous system to slowly, incrementally, expand its definition of what is safe. This is not fast work. The shadow architect took years to build what it built. Revision takes years too. But it is possible. And it begins with looking. You did not choose your first blueprints. Nobody does. They were handed to you by people who received them from people who received them from people who never questioned them either. The shadow architect was not your enemy. It was a child's best attempt at making sense of a world it didn't choose and couldn't fully understand. It kept you safe. In its own way, with its own logic, using the only tools it had. It deserves acknowledgement for that. But you are not that child anymore. And the structures that were necessary then, the defenses, the patterns, the invisible rules about what you are allowed to want and feel and become, are not necessarily the structures you need now. The most radical act available to a human being is not rebellion against the external world. It is the quiet, sustained, courageous act of examining the internal one. Of asking, which of these blueprints are actually mine? Which of them served a purpose that has now expired? And what might I build, if I were finally the one holding the pencil? The echo of your past is real. It is running through you right now, shaping this moment, coloring how you received every word of this episode. That cannot be undone. But it can be heard. Clearly. For the first time. And the moment you can hear it clearly, the moment you can recognize the echo for what it is, rather than mistaking it for your own voice, something shifts. Not everything. Not all at once. But enough. This has been the echo principle. We map the unseen blueprints of human behavior so that you can finally decide which ones to keep. We'll see you in the next one.